Hello, everybody. Welcome to Products, Platforms, and Culture session. We are here with 5 people, Curtis, me, Randall, Dave, and Vanessa. And today we are conducting an analysis of existing project management tools and operations to provide a general framework. And specifically, we today are then touching the strategy to choose platforms and products, the tools that use to shape our culture, and we do some ideation around that. And from this ideation, we will also learn how do communities collaborate and make some sense of it, because we have quite a wide spectrum of communities and the way they operate. And I feel like every project manager and the person or the team lead or group lead I meet has their own methods, but there is some kind of truth in all of them and some ways we could share our knowledge. And if we are able to do that, we will be also probably able to integrate into much larger community or ecosystem that can efficiently do projects together. So yeah, I will, at the beginning, I will share a bit of a proposal, where is this all coming from, and then we jump into these topics I mentioned and finish up with closing topics. So when we created the proposal, we thought as a problem first, and we found that there is no general framework for decentralized project management, decentralized applications. We back then were just at the cusp of testing out dwork, and we thought, let's do some playing around with that tool, but also keep in mind like some general views of what we even need in project management. So when we go out and look for these tools, what we want to propose to communities, what they should have, and what are the like minimum features that we should look for. With like this need of understanding how it all works, these workshops are now created to kind of gather this information together and then also analyze it and then get some kind of results to make the differences between all of these products and stuff we are providing to each other, and the use cases and experiences we have. And this will be a snapshot. So the space is always exploring, and it's not going to be a live feed of everything, but it will be nice to kind of do it every now and then to see where have we gotten, how we have advanced. And so hopefully this video will be also standing through time and giving us insights even years ahead. And we intend to do a functional analysis of the common use cases and consider various abstract models or design patterns that may be used in specific circumstances. So it's a little detailed way to look at it. And today we have Curtis with us, who was also participant in the previous session and talking a bit about platforms and like products and his experiences. He also a little bit touched on like a ClickUp and the tool on that side. And we were wondering, like, how did you get to that? Like, how did you find your way to choose these tools you have been using? And when you joined in this community space, what you have seen and how has it changed the way you have been using your tools or providing insights to other? And overall, like, what was your strategy to choose platforms and making the difference between platforms and products, and where do you start from?
Okay, absolutely. Thank you, Tivo. I'd say, where it kind of started was my professional career previously, before decentralization became my life choice. We had a agile workflow and CI/CD implementation. So the project management and epics and sprints were all heavily managed. And I found the structure that we operated in very efficient, because everybody kind of knew their role. We had project managers, we had facilitators, and people just making sure all the pieces worked. In a decentralized community, you tend to have less resources than an enterprise would have. So you're missing some of those roles in your solutions, and that becomes a bit of overhead, was my experience. So when you approach a project or a team and an effort, a set of goals or milestones, you kind of need to assess what capacities and resources you have available, and that contributes to the project management structure and implementation. How strict is it going to be, and what tools you're going to use? Like we discussed last time, the differences between a platform versus a product. If you have a smaller team, you're probably going to lean more towards the product. If you have an experienced subject matter expert in, say, ClickUp, then they can build out their own structure using that platform. You mentioned what were some of the questions that I asked. When Dave and I kind of started ours, it was the two of us to start. So light management, little overhead was our intention, and trying to assess what are the capacities of the team. Are they familiar with agile workflows or waterfall or CI/CD? Are they familiar with any of the tools themselves, like ClickUp or Notion or dWork, any of those? What were some of the other considerations? There was definitely a lot of considerations. Long-term, how long are these projects intended to live for? Are they short-lived, 30 days, or are they meant to be quarter-long projects, biannual projects? That kind of informs what tool set you may need to support that structure and that system. Budget. I know that's kind of an obvious one, but budget considerations. How much are you willing to pay for the difference or the product that you're going to use for your project management? And I'd say so our journey, I came from the enterprise strict system and I did enjoy it, but there's too much inner pieces that require overhead. So when I started with Dave's, I did research ClickUp and Notion. Both of them had their pros and cons and advantages. ClickUp, you can kind of just get going immediately and with complex level systems, whereas Notion is you sort of have to design and develop your own database and properties that are going to account for the metrics and the metadata for the project management side itself.
And you would consider ClickUp a platform, right?
ClickUp is, yeah, I would consider that a platform because it can be used in many different ways, and people actually produce products on top of the platform. They're creating the templates and the tools for the end user so that they don't have to. So I definitely consider ClickUp a platform versus a product. Curious if there's any other opinions in the room on that.
Dave?
Oh, I would like to add a few things as well. Internally to Decipher, and Curtis is also part of Decipher as well. We went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, as we tend to do sometimes. We went and also took a deep dive between Obsidian and Notion as well. We were trying to really figure out something that would fit best for us in a long term. It seemed that the big differences between the two is more like similar to what Curtis had mentioned, service versus platform. It seems that from my perspective, after doing some research, it seemed like we're getting more of a platform based out of Notion and something more like a service without a service agreement with Obsidian. And it seemed like it was a little bit easier to manage a project inside of Notion in that format. Yes, it does take a little bit of massaging and manipulating it to make it to where it fits your team as far as a tool set, but also it's kind of the long-term approach. And that's also activated a couple different discussions as well about long-term solutions for things that we've worked on internally as well. So it was pretty insightful.
You drew attention to a third term, service. not a product, not a platform, but a service. Can you say a little about that? Like what distinguishes a service from those other two terms for you?
Oh, for me personally,
Yeah, why'd you use that term as opposed to product or platform?
well, it's more like the approach of the second brain. So yeah, we were kind of looking for that as well, to approach all our internal processes. So we wanted the kind of the hybrid. So it seemed to me when we were doing research, because we all our team individually did their research and then came up with their own conclusions, and then we discussed it as a team. So personally, I felt that Obsidian was more like along the lines of a service for second brain, instead of like a hybrid platform plus service, which is kind of what I saw Notion as being for long-term usage. So that's kind of the reason why I went with that word and that approach to it.
Thanks.
So both Obsidian and Notion was used?
We
It
did
was
pilot. We piloted
Pilot
both
both,
Notion
yeah.
and Obsidian and dWork and ClickUp. Yeah.
It's a one thing is like you said that long term, but choosing so many things, aren't they all doing the same thing or same purposes? Or there was like this idea like trying which is working best, so giving like a timeline. Okay, let's 2 months, let's use this, or for this project, let's use this. Like you mentioned, each product, like each project has its different use cases, where because the projects needed these kinds of tools, or you were more like, oh, we haven't tried it yet, let's try for this project Notion, and let's try this for this project Obsidian, because we don't know which is best, but we want to have the experience. Or were there more like, we know that this product will more likely be better with Notion because we have some experience individually with it.
So during our testing and our pilots, it was actually just trying to compare Notion versus ClickUp versus Obsidian and versus dWork. It wasn't necessarily a unique case fit, for those testing purposes. It was just kind of more A/B benchmarking in a way. So we did a couple of iterations where we ran Notion and Obsidian and ClickUp all for the same project. And then we did individual projects through the different tools as well. No, we didn't. I don't think we got that insight of which product which platform or product fit based on the project itself until we had that experience necessarily. And honestly, it kind of comes down to familiarity of the tool, because you can all three platforms, 4 platforms. No, I'm going to say 3. Sorry, excuse me. dWork is a bit of a unique product. The other 3, so Notion, Obsidian, and ClickUp, can all be used in the same context with the same level of complexity and detail. So you can manipulate either product or platform to do what you need it to do. I think it comes down to familiarity of the product itself and the upfront cost, because ClickUp is a lot quicker to get into if you want to start using templates, but it's the more expensive option versus, say, Notion. You can build that same template from the ground up, but you're going to spend some upfront cost time-wise.
You said what you need to do, which is completely abstract. If we could be more concrete about what those tools are good at specifically, versus what needs you are assessing them against, I think it would be much more useful. And I put a sticky note, alignment and gaps between tools and needs. Like what particular needs?
It's kind of, I would say it's a little bit of a challenge. I hear 2 questions out of your questions, Randall, that what are they good at? And I feel like they're all capable of being equal. It's just the path of getting there is different.
Are they good at
For-
file management?
Well,
they good at-
Notion itself, all three of them are capable of file management. And I'll kind of go back to a little bit of what Dave said, second brain, if depending on what methodology or what, protocol you want to implement for your second brain management system will impact what tool to use. Obsidian kind of has an influence. It wants you to use a certain second brain type of system. Notion sort of pushes its influence on its second brain. ClickUp doesn't have a second brain, but it does have document management. And so you can, I'd say ClickUp, if you were managing project management by itself and you're not trying to integrate second brain or any other form of insight management, then ClickUp by itself can account and it has a full stack solution for project management: document repository, version history, task management, project management, goal setting, milestones. And Notion and Obsidian can do all those things as well, but they have a second layer of data management, essentially, that is more heavily integrated than ClickUp is.
So ideally in a evaluation matrix, you'd say, we needed X. These platforms did X with these, more or less well with these notes. We needed Y evaluation on that axis. We needed Z evaluation on that axis.
Yeah, okay. I'd like that. I'd like to write that out. I can't do it on the fly, I think, but I'll start working on that right now on a sticky note.
I think we got a great start and context of the strategy. And some of the tools already kind of popped up from the list too. And actually you mentioned dApp. The second question would be, how do you define your processes and methods? And you briefly touched it on like looking at the things you could use as a long term and like that the tools you're using for long term, but are there something that you use for short term or any other methods or processes like you have come across that are very interesting and not easy to kind of find
Are you
out?
asking how these tools support would support a community that is doing a process or wants to do a process?
It can be this too. It's because it's another process. Like we in, for example, yeah, some groups are just like gathering people together first and like making kind of like a proposal or some idea. Hey, are we interested in doing this? And then they come together and then they start like creating the actual idea or a project. So they don't even have, they have the feeling that they want to do a project together and about something, but they don't know how to approach it. And then it's like, okay, we have bi-weekly meetings, and that is a process. We just get up, we fill up the form, what we want to do, or what, and then like defining processes. I wonder, like, is it? And from my case, I usually feel like I create the select the process model, and then I just put it and kind of assume everybody agrees to that, and then it's a kind of natural. But I wonder other methods to even select the way you do project management or like doing a thing, and how you or your team has been done it. Like who chose these? Like oh we need to use a ClickUp. Like was there a process to choose that, or there was somebody that should okay, or he's a team lead and everybody were feeling like okay, he's going to give us suggestions and we just go along with it and see what happens.
Yeah, in our case, I kind of wish that we had a more structured approach to it. It was the two of us really trying to do, the three of us trying to do a lot of work. And our approach was not generic in the sense of how could it be applicable to everybody else. It was kind of our unique case. What do we need? And like Randall asked for earlier, we needed X, so we researched, and then we discovered we needed Y and Z. And when I kind of write that out, it is proprietary to our use case. However, that was kind of the process. We started to use ClickUp and then found, okay, well, here's the pay, here's the pricing model, and here's its limitations, and then looked into Notion, identified all those same things. And it wasn't until we actually started playing with it that we discovered, Y and Z were actually necessary. So our approach was really just what features did we need? We did identify together as a group what features we needed. And then I think I had a little bit more time resource. So I did a lot of the research and playing around with it, building it, and then implementing it. Then as a team, we kind of ran with it. The decision was overall a whole group decision, but I think a lot of my research was to inform the rest of the group. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting, Curtis. Did you find that you started off with requirements, but when you started using some of the tools, did the tools start to mold you? And could you give some examples of that?
Yeah, great question, Stephen. Thank you. They did, but it's kind of like how I see, insight. You take people's other opinions and then you sort of form your own opinion based off of their insight in a way. And that may be changing your opinion, but in overall, it was adopting some of the best practices that I learned from these different platforms. ClickUp did actually provide a lot of that for me because it's a platform and people build products on top of it. And those products tend to implement best practices and Kanbans versus Gantt charts versus whatever, just implementing different standards and getting to play with them that are fully created products on ClickUp actually provided some of that insight that helped change and form my practices. Yeah. Notion did the same thing, different templates, but they were different. I felt like different implementations. ClickUp is very project management oriented, and Notion's trying to leverage the data management side plus a database. And excuse me, I'm so sorry.
I'll kind of add to that as well. There was a point in time where Notion integrated AI as well, which kind of given us an additional feature set that we didn't even realize that we were looking for until we started using it, and then it expanded upon that as well. And now we're implementing like a way of the second brain actually helping us do more for our research, and it's actually cutting our research time down a little bit as well when it comes to trying to figure out what's the next steps. This is the researches that we've done so far. How do they integrate with each other? And then it being a database on top of that, you're able to query certain things that you've already researched and start connecting dots, which is similar to the way Obsidian works as well. So it just kept expanding. So we kind of just kept gravitating towards that because we weren't able to get that out of ClickUp so much because it's more, like Curtis said, project management oriented, but we were looking for more. And I think communities are looking for more as well. So
to draw more specificity into the generalizations you've been saying, it sounds like you were seeking task management when you looked for some of these platforms. It sounds like you were interested in pulling together a knowledge base, a knowledge management outcome. Would those be concrete examples of X's and Y's?
I would say we were actually seeking project management, and then realizing the power of integrating second brain or knowledge management into project management. And to add to what Dave is saying, there is a point of features. What features do these different products and platforms have, and comparing them. But I think there's an additional component that we didn't realize going in. It's touching the outside of its ecosystem. And what does that integration look like? Notion is fairly open and open source, and its integrations with Google and calendars and authentication systems, automation systems, it can actually do so very intuitively. Whereas ClickUp, it feels clunky. We've tried integrating it with Notion. We tried integrating it with dWork. We tried integrating it with some other services. And it's not, I think because of its closed source code, it was a bit of a struggle to get those integrations to occur. Sorry, that was an additional one. I didn't mean to get away from your question, Randall.
So just curious about the AI integration. That was Notion. Is that, you found that when that was introduced, that upped the usefulness of Notion?
I'm sorry.
You're referring to the AI integration tools, Dave, I think, on Notion. Can you expand upon that a little bit, on how that helped you?
What really helped is we were all researching similar things and adding to our Notion database. But once we got the integration of AI, we were able to kind of connect dots of things that were in individual entries, and then it expanded upon that. So now that everything is linked together, once we started querying in our search bar of certain things, it all started kind of connecting together, and you can kind of go, oh, okay, so they're researching MBOs, and here's some information that one of the team members have integrated with MBOs, and well, I have some information as well, and now they're all kind of collecting inside a database and then linking together. So then it's easier to pull all that information all at once to form like documents, research papers, etc. So it became like literally a ever-growing second brain that was like learning off of the entries that we were adding. Curtis, I know he's got more experience in it too. So go ahead and add it, PDD.
Yeah, no, I was kind of roughly aware that there's been some tools plugged into Notion on large language models, and similar with tools like Gitbook and other plugins. And I suppose that is kind of helping you do something that may be done more manually in Obsidian, because in Obsidian you'd have to connect the dots yourself, wouldn't you? I may be wrong, because there might be a more recent AI plugin for Obsidian, who knows? You know, but we should probably come next, I imagine. But and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I suppose if you build up a resource in one of these platforms, and then a tool comes along that helps you index that source, then that raises it up. That raises up its usefulness. Is that what you'd say?
Yes.
I think it's an exponential, like it adds everything to project management, to second brain, documentation, like every component that you need within a community is enhanced. And that is actually the Decipher platform that we're building is kind of exactly what we're talking about. It's the project management, the governance, the second brain, the information dissemination. But when you start actually stacking these different tools and features and allowing them to communicate with one another. So the data from your project management is actually being fed from, say, your meetings, transcriptions, your AI summaries, so on and so forth. And then you're just click, 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 and you could even produce that project structure itself. The tasks, the agenda, I mean, AI can really help with that, because you're taking your information resource, then your project management, and another, and allowing them to communicate with another. It's
So would
powerful.
would you say that this may have caused a pivot to a more AI way of thinking? So thinking in terms of contexts rather than in terms of process?
Yeah, because it also changed the way we entered our data into our database. I see Carter shaking his head.
But
It
I
did.
love the way Steven thinks. Steven, I can tell he
Yeah.
gets, you know, it
Gets
took
it.
us maybe a month to kind of like get to those types of questions. And every time I hear from you, you're immediately to those awesome questions. So I completely changed. I was heavily second brain oriented, and I tried the different methodologies. And I love everything about it, but how you organize and how you tag, like the metadata of your data, is done a specific way. With AI, it's taking that practice, but it's removing it from us. So it's no longer a manual. So like you said, with Obsidian, it sounds like you have a lot of experience with Obsidian. You have to create the backlinks and the tags and make sure that everything has its own orientation. AI just completely removes that need, and it's organized differently. With the vector databases, it's semantic, and it has a different way it's actually organized, but you don't need to anymore. And in fact, we no longer need that folder hierarchy structure with AI. What we're discovering is everything can be flattened and then identified with vectors, and then use semantic searches to find the relevant information and then kind of bring it together. So how we actually structure data is completely different with AI. And so the only reason now we're discovering you still need that folder hierarchy structure for the humans, right? To like interact and navigate some of this data. But your massive data resource is just this giant vector database to an extent.
So the legacy, the folder layout may be like almost like a legacy system, which is like a user interface, whereas your knowledge model has shifted to a vector model, which is quite interesting, which ultimately is like matrices and semantic analysis. One thing that comes to mind immediately is that different from a graph approach? You know, because if you think of Obsidian as graph approach and edges and all that, and I suppose there's some parallels, but it could be a different paradigm altogether, couldn't it? Maybe. Sorry, Tiva.
Oh no, Curtis answer, and then.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on track, Stephen. It's imitating what we're doing in Obsidian, but I think at a bit more of an efficient way, because it has, you know, it's essentially creating all the backlinks and tags that you would want to include. However, we're humans, so we don't, you know, we're not that complete, but it is doing the same very, very similar structure. It's all graphs and values, and it's weighted. I mean, this concept could be weighted in relation to another concept, and that value can be completely different from community A and community B, because it's actually trying to make those relations. Sorry, go ahead,
I think
Tiva.
it's easy to get stuck on the terminologies: vector database, graph database, any techniques that give you this opportunistic linkability between different structures in the database. Kind of gives you the same capabilities.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering from this now, this is a good like show how the process, like how basically your processes and like the products using define and change the way you're working. Would you suggest also the others to start data first, like thinking what are you going to kind of archive or keep in the back in your list? And when you started with any of project, did you have that already in mind that we are gonna use some tool where we're gonna pull a lot of information so that we can reference that later? Or was it more like, well, these are basically as you did more of that, you kind of learn, damn it, I needed to this information and we did it again. I guess we need to track it more efficiently. And now let's try this method. And it's more like through experience creating this data source for yourself. And now when you think back, do you suggest to also put more effort into like thinking what kind of informations and methods to use to collect the data, or you would be like, and start small and then based on your experience kind of start adding more into the data basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of challenging because after discovering a lot of the AI stuff, I've realized the necessity to understanding second brain fundamentals is less critical because the AI is alleviating a lot of that for you. And you actually don't need to necessarily implement those methodologies. However, I feel like because I did research second brain and understand like Zettelkasten and Para, because you mentioned archiving and Para's big on what's relevant information and manually you're tagging something as this is archive data. I still want it, but I don't really want it relevant to current stuff. All these different methodologies did impact how I practice AI and how I use the AI. So is it relevant is actually challenging. I don't know. AI is alleviating the need for you to know how to do all this. It kind of does it for you. But if you understand what it's doing and why it's doing it, then you can actually practice that and it becomes a bit more effective. So is it necessary to understand how to best, manage your data? I'm not entirely sure. I would say as AI is getting better, probably not.
Yes, and I'll add to that as well, Curtis, because even my entries have changed because of that. It feels like it doesn't really matter anymore. I'm more taking the approach of research and development is kind of a hobby and it's fun now because I don't have to really structure the way I do research anymore. It's like I'm just grabbing relevant information for the concepts and the topics that I'm looking for. And then I can just have AI kind of help me create the edges of the puzzle pieces. And then I can dictate the size and the shape and the color of the puzzle pieces. So it becomes more like an art form for research and development, which is more on the lines of the way how humans are supposed to interact with data, in my opinion. So it kind of changed a lot of things for me personally on how I approach researching any information, any topic.
I like that.
Yeah, it's picking up on what you just said about Zettelkasten and Curtis, which you're creating your own index cards, you're creating your own labels. With a large language model, you are sampling text. So, do you? I mean, subjectively, that may feel better, okay, to begin with, but there's also the potential for that to lead you astray, isn't there? Like, it's called hallucination, and you're aware of that. But so have you come across that where AI is leading you astray, and have you had to take remedial action against that by tokenizing or tagging things to mediate that?
Yeah, again, love the questions. Where that tends to happen, and I'm actually known to do that myself. Like I don't need AI's help for me to go down the wrong path. Is when you're doing those deep dives and abstract. If you're trying to start somewhere high level and then dive down, of course, AI doesn't know what your end point is. It doesn't because where you're approaching it from is high level down, and it will just start to bring you towards other, fishtails and other routes, and you can easily get distracted by it. So when you have information that's deeper down that you need to kind of surface a bit more, that's where I hear in your question, how do you correct that? How do you get there a little bit quicker? How do you tell AI to do that? And that kind of comes down to that hierarchy structure that we're used to. That's where you put things, that if it has a specific tag, so if you've manually tagged it, then it has a place, it has a home where you can navigate to and find it. And you can prioritize certain information, tag it with a certain priority, and then that just allows it to surface at the right point in the right time. So it's two systems in one. Go ahead, Randall.
It sounds like there might be a few points of specificity in this realm too. I used X's and Y's earlier, but maybe we'll call them I, J, and K in this realm, where like what is it that you wanted to make sure that the AIs did? Well, that would be I's and J's. Get them tagged with right keywords. Draw connections to cultural elements. I don't know. I'm just making some concrete examples up. But like, if we want to know that we got the right result, we can't just say AIs give the right result, right? You have to say give the right result in terms like this, and when they didn't, then on those specific dimensions, we can say here's the right thing. And the point isn't training AIs. The point is having the right I's and J's and K's for human needs. And if there's a AI training element that comes out of that, hey, all the better.
Yeah, both are critical. I agree, because you can't train. At least what I'm finding is you can't properly train the model if you're not properly using it to begin with. Like if you're getting different results and you're providing feedback saying it gave me the wrong answer, but it's because the I's and the J's weren't actually correctly framed, essentially the prompt or the agent prompt, if that's not specifically designed for that purpose and you get incorrect results, then the end user provides feedback saying it was the wrong thing. That's going to train the model. The model is going to end up useless in the long run until you actually. So I agree, those I's and the J's are critical, and that helps inform the model to be trained appropriately as well.
We have some now. We went to exploratory side, going from like a very beginning where it started and going through like the tool set of a mind and where we ending up and how it changed. Now with this in mind, let's step to the next item. What are the differences between products and platforms? And from this discussion, you already mentioned some, and perhaps we could now take a few minutes and join into this section here on the Maraboard and come up with some of, if there is some sticky notes still missing, and like what are the differences between products and platforms. Perhaps you could note them down here, and then we also have a bit of this. From your point of view, Curtis and Dave, does this sticky note seem to be on right sides? Are platforms usually higher and products cheaper?
You know, honestly, it's kind of a mix. I'd say it's a median. Like products, generally the platforms are subscription models, and the products, they have both one-time fee and they have subscription model type products. There's free platforms, pay for platforms, free products, pay for products. So I'm not sure that I see it really going in any specific direction. But in general, platforms like ClickUp have a fee, a subscription.
Or
And
it's
then
limited, it's limited access. So like it's free to a certain point, and then it's like, oh, now you have to start paying for it. Products usually, like Curtis stated, is something that you already start paying for. Okay, we know what we're getting for X.
Yeah, I think let's just go through quickly all of these, and because we don't really want to start a big discussion, we have some more items to brainstorm. but to have that kind of a feeling and sense of where things lie, and we have that. So it doesn't require the full understanding of a product elements, may require significant adoption of practices to fit the product, often small scope, general purpose built or use cases, low ability to influence its capabilities. Often people adopt the tool and use in ways not intended, since they can't afford a platform. Tool pre-collage a creative process. Slow feedback process for enhanced performance can be used for AI. Need to be able to integrate with your other tools, otherwise platforms don't represent the problem here. Need to be able to integrate with other tools. And efficient, concrete results. As for platforms, usually takes more time to learn, need to have firm understanding of use cases, to use platforms, must fit solutioning to fit the platform's paradigms.
I didn't put it there, but I think what it may be saying is that a platform is a more complete paradigm, and so there's less gaps for the differences in the way that you work to fit in.
No, that wasn't my point.
Well, Tibo did ask me to comment, so.
Somebody earlier mentioned about Notion, I think, and it was in common with Obsidian that the platform has a certain paradigm, and then like the solutions that you make have to like fit, like they're influenced by that paradigm as opposed to, you know, some other paradigm. That's the essential way that platform works.
Okay. I see Steven's hand up.
Yeah, I just want to notice an impression that a lot of the things that have been pointed out on products and platforms are, for want of a better word, associated with the Web 2 paradigm. So you're kind of like, whereas maybe Decipher or what Gimbal Labs are doing wants to move towards a Web 3 paradigm. And the route from Web 2 to Web 3 may be eased by using AI. Why? Because it may force you to think differently in a contextual way. If you notice that a lot of the Web 2 platforms here are very proprietorial, you know, so, and also they're kind of fragile because they're kind of enforcing commercial relationships that you don't want to do, which you'd want to supersede in a Web 3, if that's what you're aiming for. Do you have sympathy with that idea, Curtis or Dave, do you think?
Absolutely.
Curtis, you want to go first?
No, I mean, 100%. It's identifying some of the systems and building tools in an open source, you know, community so that we can leverage them. This is what I've been passionate about for years now, is instead of building this proprietary closed system, taking the components out of it and having multiple communities build these products and platforms and solutions in an open collaborative way. I can't wait to start seeing those stack on top of each other.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
I feel like just because it's a platform does not make it feel like Web3. It seems like either a platform or a product could feel like Web 2 or Web 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Web 2 can apply to both. You could have a Web 2 product and a Web 2 platform, or you could have a Web 3 product and a Web 3 platform. Yeah, what distinguishes the two is Web 2 is well, a lot of the stickies there are veering towards Web 2 because that's where most of the products that we use at the moment are. But one exception to that might be D-Work, which is starting to become Web 3 because you're connecting your wallet basically, and you're starting to use smart contract and blockchain constructs. Yeah.
Yes,
That's curious. That's curious because I still see dWork as Web 2 that's just implementing Web 3 features, purely because they're not open source, and like Swarm, they wanted them to integrate Cardano wallets. And I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but had an agreement with them to do so. And it didn't work out. There wasn't access to using the Cardano developers. There was no collaboration from what I saw. So it feels a bit like a Web 2 platform that, okay, we're going to enable some Web 3 features like Wallet Connect and some backend contract type stuff. But even those contracts are written in a proprietary fashion. Nobody else can really contribute to them, amend them, iterate on them. So I'm hopeful that companies like dWork and future developers do start adopting real work, Web3, which is leveraging open source community and governance and tokenomics, or at least management of these treasuries in somewhat of a decentralized fashion. But
Yeah, that's right. It's great to be more assertive about what the implications of Web3 as well, that it should be open source, and why should it be open source?
Right.
Because, particularly because, well, I suppose it's the trust issue from the blockchain. So you can see the code underneath that's been that the smart contract or whatever is written in. So you don't have to trust someone else. And that it's that trustless element that makes it Web3. So you could say that dWork is broken in that sense, couldn't you? But
Yeah.
the only reason why I said it's Web3 because it has a wallet connector. But that's a pretty trivial thing, isn't it? It's quite simple just to add a wallet connector to stuff, isn't it? I suppose.
Yes, because and I'll take a page out of Harry's book. In my humble opinion, we're going to start to see a lot of companies do that, where they're still operating in a very Web 2 environment, but integrating Web 3 tooling to their either product or platform. And actually, we internally went through the process of building a product, and then it turned into a platform, because the ecosystem, both in blockchain and AI, started moving so fast that we kind of just said, well, if we're going to do this, we need to be able to support and we changed the name from community collaborative framework to open source community collaborative framework, because that's essentially what this is. It's supposed to be open source. Anybody should be able to take a look at our platform and say, well, that's a great tool. We don't necessarily have to use our platform because we already have ours. We can just look at their open source repo and use it. And that's where we are encouraging that as much as possible as well.
Mm-hmm. And not to get too philosophical and take us down this deep road, but I think true Web3 is also built into your business model. Like your business model needs to incorporate Web3 concepts for it to be true. And who knows what Web3's definition actually is, right? I mean, that's why I don't want, let's not go down there.
And the conclusion that comes out of all those observations is that there has to be a revenue model that is supportive of the people building those technologies and not just given away for free in a way that interferes with the livelihood of the people who are on the hook for maintaining it or letting it languish.
Randall, have you been listening on Decipher's meetings?
Okay, great. That was, now we learned a bit about products and platforms. I will take our last attention to the next topic of brainstorming what you have seen in community. So with the people you are interact with, what kind of products and platforms you have seen them using, or like strategies. And then once we have brainstormed a little bit sticky notice, and we will ask how do communities collaborate. So kind of looking at our results and then on using our experiences and making basically assumptions and we'll see where that leads us. And looking at the time, we did discuss what products and platforms have shaped your processes the most. We just did it a little bit different. But there is one question: how do you engage with existing communities? So if we are able to also touch on that later, it would be awesome. But we'll see where the time will lead us. So what have you seen in community in terms of changes in culture, what products, platforms they use, or the methods they're using? And let's give it a few minutes. I'm actually now gonna use timer to. Oh.
And we're just silently adding to the sticky notes, right?
Yeah. Okay. But it will be harder for us to select topic, or actually, do we even need to select topic? Perhaps we just use it as an information. Well, this is in 5 minutes, like a quick tap into what we see in community, and we clearly everybody had something to say even after the time ran out. So this does give a nice approach, and we simply go to the next step. How do communities collaborate and use this information as context? Even if we are not AI, it takes a little bit while to compute all this information that was shared here, and leave it at that. Sounds good. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good. If you just move on.
How do you collaborate with communities, and how do you see communities collaborating with each other?
It seems every community has their own unique approach to collaboration itself. And I'm starting to see the ecosystem. This is just my opinion, but I'm starting to see the ecosystem coming together and aligning on certain things. And SIPs, man, I can't wait to see more SIPs coming out outside of maybe Cardano. How do we actually tag the metadata for project management systems and platforms to be able to communicate, in the same manner, and like that's coming together. And it's starting to break the mold a bit of these existing Web 2 solutions that we've talked about, proprietary closed source systems. There's turning into be more widely used pathways. Gimbal Labs does things their way, and Disco Solaris does theirs. But in the end, they all need the same thing: project management, treasury management, governance, and the flavors, the ways that they implement each of those components are unique and different. But how they interact with each other, I think it's critical that they can actually interact. The project management solution that they implement is aware of the governance model and aware of the treasury and so on and so forth. I'm trying to think, like, what's valuable information here? How do communities collaborate? I feel like Randall or Stephen or Vanessa would have a question that would bring some alignment here.
I'm actually maybe what you mentioned, the names, Vanessa and Stephen, perhaps they would want to share their experience. How do they collaborate with communities, and what they see, how they do it together? So I guess we could go like a round table and everybody share a bit of that information.
Do you want to call out names, Tiva?
Stephen, then.
Yeah, that's what I was waiting on as well.
Ah, bugger. Okay. I don't know. I was in observer mode, so I was kind of like jolted out of my indolence. But yeah, I mean, you referred to, Curtis, this kind of blockchain improvement proposals, or SIPs, I suppose. And I posted a link in chat. There are a lot of people know this, but it's been the basis for decision making in blockchain since the beginning, since the Bitcoin paper, blockchain improvement proposals. So it's interesting to compare how other chains have done this, and also how there seems to come full circle in a way with Cardano, in terms of Cardano seems to be returning to an emphasis on SIPs. Now, it was always there, but when there was like a community boom, if you like, associated particularly with the price increase and NFT, there seemed to be more of an informal community. And then there seems to be, the quote I've seen, in a bear market, we return to basics, can we return to the development? And that seems to have pushed the SIP process up to the top again. And I say this neutrally because for better or for worse, because the question is, what is blockchain for? It's not just for developers. As much as we like to develop these things, it's for like the alternative economic system. And what I've seen, and this is just a personal opinion, is that kind of what used to be called the dreamers, the people who looked at what this could provide, like alternative economic systems, banking unbanked and all that, has faded a bit. And what has come to the fore is more what used to be called rather the builders, although I think you could have community builders as well. And I think that might be lost a little bit. The community builders have been neglected, maybe. Or maybe there needs to be more of a link between the two, so these are not really, these are just thoughts. So I'll put out there.
Yeah, are we talking here about how different communities within Cardano, for example, collaborate with each other? Because I think what might be missing there is the issue of power. Whoever is the bigger, richer, more powerful community with less barriers to engagement tends to have their way of working dominating. And I think it just needs to be more space for, if you're collaborating with another community, recognize the validity of their way of working. That's kind of all I have to say, really.
I actually do want to bring up what you just said.
Whoever's writing notes, it's not just about financial value. It's also about barriers to engagement. It's also about, who those communities are and how comfortable they feel and how able they are to take part.
I just wanted to point out, I think that's a very good distinction that we haven't actually defined. Is the scope of this talking about how communities collaborate within themselves or with each other?
It sounds like it might be a little bit of both. As Tiva had mentioned, collaborating with each other as far as project to project or community to community. But if the community that's collaborating with another community is not as organized and doesn't really have a true path, they're kind of just floating through, like Stefan had mentioned, NFT, trying to work with another community that is organized and knows what their culture is and what they want. It's kind of tough.
What a challenge that. I don't think it's just about, oh, you're not organized or you are organized. It's also about barriers to engagement, and it's also about money, and it's also about the fact that a way of working might look disorganized to you, but it might work for them.
Correct.
But also these things apply whether we're talking about two communities collabing or within a community. Within a community, there are silenced voices and they don't get a say in how you work. So
a community needs to be functional within itself, and that rolls up some of the factors that you mentioned, Vanessa. For purposes of this working group, I would point not to how a community collaborates with another community, but to how either functional or dysfunctional community that is treating itself as an identity, how does it do its collaboration within itself?
Go ahead, Vanessa.
Yeah, I think also when we're talking about tools, particularly, when a new tool gets introduced into a community, I think sometimes we fail to keep on educating. When new people come in, we don't always go, right, okay, here's how to use it. And when people become skilled with it, they don't always pass on the top tips. It just feels like sometimes a tool can divide a community into those who are comfortable using it and those who are not. I mean, even just we're all working on Miro. And even just 2 days ago, I had somebody say that they felt really left out in a meeting because it was Miro based and nobody had ever given them an opportunity how to use it. So, we tend to make assumptions quite a lot about who can do what. And this was a skilled person. This wasn't like somebody who you might expect not to feel comfortable with it. So I think we just have to, be a little bit more aware of the barriers that might be there.
This is actually bringing up a lot of things that we kind of talked about, Curtis, as well. I do agree with every bit of the discussion thus far. I think it's we're seeing a flux right now, where there is a group of new, and they're still being onboarded and understanding the ecosystem. And then there's also people that have been here a very long time and they're used to doing things a certain way, or trying to evolve into doing something different. So for instance, Cardano for the longest time was a very centralized way of doing things. And then we went decentralized with the integration of stake pools. And now we're going back into a more of a centralized way of doing things again, because now we've had Catalyst, we've had a couple different things that we can pull from as far as how communities interact with each other, how things are being disseminated, how things are being run inside of a small group like Catalyst. And we see how that's kind of been progressing in the right direction, but it's also, it's going to take some time to right the ship to where it actually fully works. So now there is a central authority being pulled back in to kind of get us into a mind state of where we should be going. And then we'll go, that whole process again will be decentralized, to get us into that mindset of, oh, hey, look, this is how we can be a hybrid of both centralized and decentralized at the same time. And we're internally having those discussions as well, because it's not an easy thing. And I know that everybody is not going to be happy with how it all gets done, but it's still a discussion that needs to be had, and so that everybody's on the same page. And as terms of people being left behind and feeling left behind, having a platform that gives you that level of education that you can go to, and that information being relayed to everybody, and being created in a centralized way and then being disseminated in a decentralized way is actually very important as well.
I would add to what you said there, Dave, by pointing out that it shouldn't just be education on how you're going to be frozen out, but that there should be a way that you can find out how to be included.
I 100% agree. And this is another reason why we have been looking at our reputation system, because if you got onboarded, and instead of having to start asking people questions individually, like, hey, how do I do this? Where do I need to go? The onboarding process needs to be somewhat streamlined to where you can actually, as you do certain things on a platform or outside of a platform, your reputation almost gets built up to where you feel a little bit more confident in attending meetings like this, or attending a Catalyst meeting, or attending a Gimbal Labs meeting, to where you're hesitant. And the reason why you're not engaging is because you don't feel educated enough to partake in the overall conversation. So we're looking at everything any which way.
What Dave's talking about is to address both what Randall and Vanessa were saying earlier. Vanessa talked about Miro being a blocker. If your particular community's culture is to use, say, Miro, that would be part of the onboarding, and it could just be a link to a YouTube video, external YouTube video, but that's tracked and that contributes to reputation. So it's about what we're trying to address with that reputation system is alignment, understanding the culture of this particular community, and then how can one contribute to that community. And it's a series of onboarding and quests that can be captured on chain, and then that unlocks access to certain things like participating in the bounty boards or access to the treasury, so on and so forth. Sorry, go ahead, Vanessa.
Sorry, yeah, just to say that whilst that sounds lovely and people go and watch a video on how to use a tool, we also need safe places for people to practice where they don't feel that they're being seen by people who are already very skilled, who are just going to go, you're doing it wrong. People need to play with it and maybe even get together to play with it so that they can develop skills that you can't do just by doing it on your own. But I'm going to shut up now because I really want to hear what Sebastian's going to say. Sorry,
Yeah.
Chief.
Yeah, I want to.
Okay, sure. Thanks, man. Okay, I think with the pass of time, I have seen a tendency from the community to create their own tools in general. For example, you are talking about Notion and some other tools. Chorus, for example, was part of the tutors of Gimba Labs in the second version of the tutorial. And in that time, we are working on Canvas, and Canvas offers some kind of features, but not others. I'm talking about my experience, my current experience. So currently at Gimba Labs, we are working on a different tool. We create our own tool to deliver on learning product or service or whatever. At some point, you can distinguish between products and services. You just have in mind the purpose. That is relevant when the product is of the goal of a product or a service is the people in general. So I think this community has a serious tendency to create its own tools, and we as community, we are looking for our own way to make things, and that's a good thing in my opinion, because at the end that's the result of the creativity and of all of these dynamics of manipulate things and start to think about what better or worse are those things. It's just a result. Okay, that's my opinion in this for the moment. Thank you.
I think, did somebody have their hand up before? I'm sorry. But thank you, Sebastian. That was great. I didn't know that information before.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that we are going a little time, and so I'm not holding anyone here. And then if you have to go and jump, then feel free to. But I did want to kind of stay to my word and allow everybody to share something about this section. And thank you, Sebastian. And next one will be Randall. Would you have time to share your experience?
Just in general, that each community does a whole lot of ad hoc figuring out of how to collaborate, and most of those experimental ad hoc collaborations lead to dead ends, and a few times, in a few cases, there are some productive collaborations, but it's as far as I've seen, not the norm. There's generally not very good alignment. Alignment is I think it's a real challenge. And then, just drawing attention to one sticky note on screen, how to the problem, maybe it was in the prior section, but the problem of just having good stake building capability. I guess it is in this section, not in the last one. Barriers to stake building. Like, it's all well and good for communities to have some treasury and some promise of ways that people can engage and expect to earn some of that precious financial asset that they can use to create safety in their lives. And then typically that runs out very quickly, and suddenly you have a community with absolutely zero engagement.
I wonder,
Not a sustainable pattern. Go ahead. What?
I wonder, is it the community if it doesn't engage with each other? Because, for example, which we didn't really establish at the start, and that also perhaps was a bit of hard, was like, what is a community in this case we talk about? And I recently started to think communities as also like a vector, or like a different way that in order to create a community, there is your perception, who is your community, or who are you able to label. So if I look at all the faces in here, I'm actually able to recognize everybody, and I could give a label Catalyst community to all to you because you are part of this network of these people. But then if you go to Swarm, I'm actually able to do that here, except for one individual calling out here, Dave. But but I know that you technically are a swarmer in the philosophy of that, but it's not like we have like a great interaction and like understanding the clear mission, and even in swarmers themselves, we are not aligned in all of these visions we're having. So it's even more complicated to do that. And another paradigm now is that what you think is your community, and where do you label all of these people into the positions or into this, they're basically like bubbles in a sense. And aggregating all of that information together would actually, in my opinion, give the map of community themselves, which is not clear, because then this starts to feel like, okay, what is now the proprietary information? Like, because I don't really want for everybody to see, okay, Teo, okay, who are your friends, who are milling it, who do you know, who is where, and this like gets very spying information. But the way we are conducting is giving that these like breadcrumbs and this information somewhat available. And on chain also, we are now transacting with each other. So when communities do collaborate with each other, we are sometimes doing this transactional activity to provide the proof that to the communities that we are working together, and to the outside that we are working together, and creating this network narrative. And that's like another layer on top of how communities kind of speak to each other. And it's like another tool we have now in our arsenal. So it's quite a complex, and yeah, when I say mean communities, I usually mean like a smaller set of people from Catalyst, because this is my main experience in just out in a wild, just coming into the calls and talking to people and sharing plans and helping each other, which usually never happened, only in like a P2P sense, where like, oh, I had a job and my role was to do this, and then I just went to another company, which was now now to me it's like not a company but the community and just a group, and I already assume it is a community, and thinking like the thinking paradigm has changed for that sense. Yeah, and I see already hands up. Stephen.
Yeah, I always sort of smile a bit when I hear the term alignment, and it reminds me of the meaning of alignment in AI, which is our safety measure to enforce contexts, which can be useful. Sometimes you do need to enforce a context, but for me, and this is a personal thing, I suppose, the attraction of a community is it's in its difference, in its plurality. So if I go to a community and it's very monolithic, there's just like some communities are like that actually, and they may need to be like that if they're focused on a very specific task. But the health of the community, it seems to me, like in a broad sense, like Cardano or Singularity Net, is that fact there's different places to go. So it's not so much how can you collaborate, but where do you go to collaborate? You know, what's the different places? Because not every place you go to will be for you. You know, some places will be, some places it won't be. And so I wouldn't say, maybe there's a different meaning of alignment there. Maybe it's more about where can you go, where do you align, you know, in that sense, rather than the killer of a community is overall alignment. Is my view. So. Curtis, really.
Yes, I with Tivo's perspective, I completely agree in regards of sustainability. Alignment is I think a critical component of it. But your example of, say, Swarm, and your understanding of what the vision is and the statement might be a different perspective from somebody else. Each person kind of has their own. However, you guys have been productive and you've been successfully making progress. In the long term, it may be hurt if it doesn't have the proper vision, but it's able to be productive because you have certain components sort of figured out. How is the collaboration working? D-work, and you have a bit of a structure that's able to leverage, you know, productivity. So it's almost independent. How does a community collaborate? It's more beneficial with the appropriate vision and culture understanding. However, it's not, I think, a necessity to like what Randall was talking about. One person just can come into this community purely because they want security, a paycheck or something, and they don't even know or understand what the culture or the vision is. They're just here for that one purpose. You can still succeed and have a vision without requiring that as, I think, part of the necessities, if that's making any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about finding a locality. I just think it like a big neighborhood, really, in a sense. It's like you know, and so anyway, Dave's got his hand up, so I don't want to take what say.
No, I wanted to add to it because we had this discussion with Harry last week as well about culture, and I was always under the impression that the community as a whole should define the culture, but what we've seen, and it's almost like the people that are beginning the stages of the community should define the culture, and then the people outside should decide whether or not they want to participate or be a part of that culture. So it's you know, having a vision statement, a mission statement, some way of communicating what your culture is like, so then people can make that decision. Go right ahead, Randall.
Oh, just chaining on to the same thing that you're saying. To me, alignment isn't about this is what you have to be. It's instead signal that stands in opposition to pure chaos. And you may align over here in this subpart of the community and not align over there, but alignment serves as a foil to pure chaos.
Yeah, I've never pictured it that way before, but yes, I can see
Not
that
as
now.
not as a constraint.
Correct.
It provides some constraints, but it doesn't have to be individually constraining.
Correct. Yeah, because it's like even right now we're working with DAO Lens and our alignment is very well defined because we've had a couple conversations before even starting working with each other. But then it's still also we're still testing the relationship, right? We're still we align on a lot of things, but now it's the test of relationship. How do we work together? How does that how do we track that, right? So we are working together on the hackathon. So, and that's just a small use case of what the relationship could look like in the future. So we wanted to start off small before we jump into this thing, and the alignment is not really defined. And then also the perspectives change because the ecosystem changes. How does that get defined? How do we communicate that? There's a lot of things there. So the more we educate ourselves and working together on a small use case, then we can expand from there. So yeah, we've defined our culture by having those conversations and discussing the alignment. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
No, that's fine. It's funny because it's a really interesting conversation, this actually. And I've just been rereading Talib's Skin in the Game, and he refers there to Ellen Ostrom, who wrote a lot about the commons and the tragedy of the commons, and how different scales, the community will change depending on how far you're zoomed in, how big the community is. So a community of 3 people is very different from a community of 10,000 people, totally different, right? Like really, profoundly different. And so for me, I kind of got a gut reaction against anything that's homogenous or anything that's aligned. I'm kind of also informed by a kind of scientific approach, which would be fallibilism. People are not perfect; they're flawed. They cannot align. To say that you align is actually a lie in some sort of sense, because any alignment has to be contingent. Otherwise, you're kidding yourself. So there's a lot of things going on here. Maybe we're not, maybe we could also be talking at cross purposes here, because there's sometimes when alignment is appropriate. Let's say you are a community of 3 people. It'd be a real head fuck if everyone didn't agree, because you just need to agree because there's only 3 of you, get on, But if it's like 500 people, you look at the SIP process, 61694 and all that sort of stuff. There's a different, that is kind of like chaos, maybe random, but there's still a need maybe alignment isn't an appropriate word in that context. Maybe the word is stability, stabilization,
Cohesion.
Cohesion is a bit different, but anyway, Vanessa.
No, I was just going to agree with you about if there's only 3 of you, but then I sometimes think it's just about how much time you've got. Sometimes it can be incredibly productive if there's 3 of you and you don't entirely agree and you've got time to work that out. But when we're talking about kind of using tools and collaborating across the community, we don't often have that time. So I think it is often a matter of, you've got to sometimes put a lid on potential collaborations that you just know there's no synergy. I think if you just know it's not going to work, and it's not necessarily a matter of having to have your mission completely laid out and formulated and everything. I think it's just sometimes you just know it's not going to work. And sometimes that's a pity, but sometimes it can be so destabilizing to a community to be working with somebody who has got the skills they need, but doesn't have any understanding of them as a community. And so that's where, again, these power relations come in, because often those who've got the skills are powerful. And then it can be really difficult to say, okay, we want to work with you in this limited way for this limited little project, but we don't want you to give us tools that are not appropriate for us or that completely destabilize the way we work. Yeah, it's complex.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. I was going to add to, just because it kind of, some of these ideas and concepts we're talking about lead into what we're working on, the proposal, open source collaboration framework, and how do you actually create that exchange of value to where it's a fair exchange. And I feel like that's applicable here when we talked about vision and alignment. And Steve and I do agree, alignment feels like a bit of a wrong word for me, because as humans, we do this with just one-on-one relationships with our friends, our friendships, and expands into communities. You're kind of internally putting together a list of value propositions. What are they bringing to the table? And then what are we bringing to the table? What can we benefit from each other? And is there synergies? Doesn't matter if the vision statement matches. It's just, do I find value in what you're bringing to the table? And do you find value in what I bring to the table? Let's get our mutual, value exchange out of this interaction, whatever that is. And I'm hoping that with that framework, we can kind of identify some of those components, because I feel like that's the beginning of any kind of collaboration, is understanding what are we here for? What are we working on towards together? And hopefully our values don't have to align, but we're getting what we need out of it mutually. And the whole entire ecosystem is benefited from it. I forget, Harry talks about it all the time, exponential, right? There's the win-win, then the win-win-win is an exponential, where I win, you win, and the ecosystem wins. Sorry. That's it.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I was actually going to bring that up as well with Harry's perspective on everybody winning versus two parties winning, and then the ecosystem doesn't really get anything out of it. But I agree that there is a way to do this. But it's a lot of things happen where we're moving so fast as a project or as a community, and the discussions about the core understanding of the objective or the purpose or the vision, or how do we be sustainable in the long term, for because not every project needs to be short term. Some projects need to really be long term, and Cardano is a long term project, and we still haven't seen all of it yet. It's so we're all here contributing to the long term vision of the project, but it seems at times that because there's this need of moving so fast, that those discussions are not able to be brought up and talked about. And then we run into a problem where, now we're kind of stuck. We kind of need to go back and have those conversations now. And from time to time, there's got to be a way to be able to juggle both. Because obviously we see where AI is going. We see where blockchain is going. And I brought this up in our last meeting with Harry, and I was like, I honestly think that we're going to start hearing about Internet of Things again, because it was, short-lived. And that's actually a big part of infrastructure leading into the next revolution, which is industrial revolution, or not industrial, I'm sorry, the end of the revolution and going into the technical revolution. So but we need to have those discussions. AI needs to have overall need to have a discussion about where are we going, how do we do it, how do we secure ourselves in the long term, protecting ourselves from the technology that we're actually building. But we need to have those discussions, and
Yes.
and having alignment as well. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, it's a bit counterfactual, but I would say that the more everyone wins, the better you are at hiding the losers. So I mean, Matt Ridley wrote a book called How Innovation Works, and one of the things he came up with is he came up with a list of essential factors for innovation, and one of them was innovation thrives on fragmented governance. So it doesn't work in homogeneous environments or with the rhetoric of that. And taking open source as an example, that's why open source is successful. It's because it's not homogeneous, it's fragmented. And if you look back at the history of open source, you'll find that why is it successful? Because someone will develop something and someone will take the bits of it without asking you and say, fuck off, I just want to use what I want. And they don't care. And that's good, you know, because it's being reused. And also the IP is being shared. There's still licenses for precaution like Creative Commons and all that, and or Apache. And that is there to kind of act as a kind of referee. But the last thing open source wants is win-win-win. What it wants is more losers, actually, to come forward and to win in their own terms. So more fragmentation, less alignment.
I love that perspective. I've never had that thought before. And it's bringing the forefront of the people who can't or don't have the capabilities to, or have tried and failed, and now gives them an opportunity to go, hey, look, we made it simpler for you. We've cut down your time of doing research and development. We have come up with a solution that 3/4 of the way might work for you, and now you can take the rest of that and then add to it and get that 100% that you've been looking for. So yeah, I can see where it brings it rises the tide for everybody's boats.
And to me, it actually is a win-win-win, even though you just mentioned it is not, because it's two different people are collaborating, and the third person who doesn't care too much of that, but that one little element and it just drops that. And that is already a win, actually, like that the third win, what had to happen.
Now you need to break out of this, CT, because I think it's great that because I think you were saying it, Curtis, is that you're beginning to, and maybe Dave as well, actually, you're beginning to think in terms of coming to grips with the open source culture. Now, I think when they employed Cardano Foundation, they employed the open source guy. I can't remember, about a year or so ago. I can't remember his name, sorry. But he used to work for the Linux Foundation. And then part of his role at the Linux Foundation was to build the members-based organization, which may sound familiar. But all the members-based organization is a tiered member thing for open source. It's an administrative thing layer on top of open source, not the open source ethos itself. And if you look at, like, go back to that, like Richard Stallman, if you know that name, who the guy who wrote Emacs and used to form the Free Software Foundation. The whole idea behind that was kind of people being able to reuse your stuff, yeah, without not necessarily having to ask your permission, but also not having to screw you over either. You know, so, and there's a kind of chaos there. Yes, there is a chaos there, and there's a kind of a necessary chaos which allows innovation. It allows things to be reused, and that's why some, you know, it doesn't always work. It's quite messy as well. It can be quite fragile, you know. But at its best, it creates a kind of equilibrium where you have winners and losers, Tivo. You don't all have winners. Not everyone wins. Sorry. It's not how the world is. And you know, so you will have people who can take advantage of certain things. Oh, I see this Curtis has developed that. He's used this little logarithm. I'm going to use that and then put it in my software, that kind of thing. And you know, who wins is maybe even a different story altogether. You know.
Yeah, I guess we have like a different view of what is a winning, because to me, losing is a winning in that context if you're using it. And then so there is no losers in that sense. But you are bringing that out, that there is a distinction between those who are able to make, I guess now, what is a win? Does it mean like a financial value or some kind of reputational value that somebody brings, and now it kind of gets, again, chaotic in the spectrum of wins you can have?
Well, it all depends, right? If the lose happens when the claim of defeat. So if you say, okay, I've tried, I'm done and I'm moving on to something else, that is a loss. That's where I would term. But if you hey, we're not done yet. Well, I don't feel like I'm done yet, and you continue to scratch away at it, try to figure out a solution to make it work, pivot, etc. And then you finally can have that aha moment, and you're like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is how I need to do it, and I can pull these tools together to make this work. It almost becomes a win at that point. Admission of defeat is the loss. It's like we've seen stories over time depicted like that, right? So 300 is a great story of that. Those Spartans did not lose the battle because they did not admit defeat. And this is why they're held in history the way that they are.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote from Talib. There's two people who have fuck off money. One who are very, very rich, and those who don't have any money at all, because they can do what the fuck they want, And so winners, losers, well, depends on your standpoint, And I think a lot of people in this ecosystem, particularly decentralization, and it's not quite a nice mixture of people coming to seek freedom here sometimes. And some of those people are very, very poor, and some are very, very rich, which is quite interesting, actually. And I think that's very telling, because it's not about winners and losers. It's about freedom. Isn't about winning and losing in some way, or living your life. It's not just about that. To live. I think Bukowski or something wrote a book like, how to be a great loser. You can be a great loser. It's okay. So, Vanessa.
What magnificent losers. Yeah, they're great. I think there was some conversation going on earlier about how chaos is a bad thing and how we need alignment to stop the chaos taking over. And I think it's really important to notice that marginalized groups know that there is some value to chaos. It's destabilizing. So in chaos, there's the potential to overturn an existing power structure and open things up a little bit. Without chaos, you can't do that.
Vanessa, I think you might have oversimplified my point about chaos and alignment. The thing I was getting at is alignment provides it doesn't stop chaos. Chaos is actually a beautiful thing, in my opinion. Without mechanisms for there to be alignment, people act chaotically, as opposed to having some avenues for finding organization instead of pure chaos. And I very much don't think that the purpose of alignment is to stop chaos.
So I agree with that, Randall. I'm going to add to it as well. So when an artist picks up a paintbrush and starts painting, is that chaos? It depends on the perspective, right? So I'm looking at someone doing a painting. I can't really see where they're going with their painting. It looks chaotic to me, but it's a beautiful disaster for that artist to start painting, because they might not even necessarily know exactly what it's going to look like at the end. That's the beauty of the chaos in a way, because you're just throwing thought with every stroke, and it's actually coming through you as a form of art, as you're depicting what you're trying to get to. You might not necessarily know what it looks like yet. You just keep going and going and going. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that I was actually trying to paint that. That is a form of chaos, in my opinion, which is a beautiful thing.
A lot like today's session, a lot of chaotic sticky notes always. There was a little bit preparation, but it's not planned or anything. And that emerging feeling is also sometimes emergence is also chaotic. And basically, I think it always is a chaotic. And we are just here to wrap it up, understanding then the way we analyze it and the dissemination just makes it less chaotic. But even then, disseminated information compared with another disseminated information about same thing could now create a chaotic situation because they are different perspectives. And so I'm probably will never going to lose chaos, because it's going to be chaos for somebody always. There is an educational barriers, financial barriers, all the barriers we talked about today will be giving that perspective to that person. Is this chaotic or not? Because to me, there is a little bit more chaotic in some places, but most like probably for some of you, this board or mirror board looks a bit even more chaotic and not making sense of that compared to somebody else. And we have been here quite strongly, like almost 40 minutes over time, and that's a great feat, I will say. But I know all these community members are usually quite crazy, so we have shown that. I would like to still put a lead on that because it is a recording, and some people may want to check what we have done and how we work together, so not making it a very long process for them. Finishing up with a light touch of what's coming next. And we have, with this proposal and these sessions we're having, so we have one more session coming up, and we would actually like to, and it was mentioned in the meeting too, like what importance of retrospectives and how often they should be kind of made. And this last session, also the idea would be to create a retrospective session. And how it will look like right now, I'm not too sure, but we know that we want to capsulate all the previous 3 sessions, including this one. So this is a bit about me, and where do I see it? But are there any members in here who has some more straight vision of what lessons or learnings they would want to see from this next session outcome?
I mean, is there room to talk about, is there a product or something coming out of this? Is there something being derived out of this that we can use and leverage, either a document, a framework, or findings?
Let me show you the main part. So what we have been doing here is like each of these sessions, including this one, we have created these kinds of mappings where we answered very specific questions, which we hoped that will kind of emerge or like bring up elements that is needed for project management, culture management, community management, and task management. All of these like collaboration methods and like strings that are all attached to each other. And from the first session, there was actually a framework that was created, tested, played through. And with now the last 2 sessions we had, there was a bit more abstract beyond that, because we took the information what people wanted in the call to learn and know about, and the people who have watched them kind of give feedback, oh, this direction I'm interested, could it be incorporated in? And so there is a bit of this framework knowledge coming in, and as an asset, I would say it is the final closing report will be the best asset I would assume, that kind of helps to orient on all the lessons learned in these sessions.
So Curtis, would you like to see this sort of turn into some sort of learning resource materials or something like that?
Okay.
I'm just curious. Yeah, it would be nice, I think, if we could. And I'd love to contribute or participate if that was something you guys enjoyed.
Yeah, we have been moving this stuff also onto the canvas. But now we're actually moving it off the canvas, where all of these sessions basically are like modules, like going intro, what are we discussing, how do we even set up these workshops, and what we learn, so that it could be facilitated by different groups. Because this discussion we had, we even they mentioned we need more of these in order to even understand how to collaborate, like cross community, because we are in that cusp of just learning basically, because all of this, and we don't have the tools yet, and the communication methods, and when we constantly talk about it, and if we do it in a way that builds on our knowledge and able to kind of compare at least how the results, it will broaden our experience and finding these standard collaboration methods. One assigns mentions in chat, it would be good to try pull together a learning from the session into recommendations for a framework as our proposal, as suggested. Maybe it will be more what it shouldn't be than we envisioned.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that could be part of the retrospective session. So we start to take stock of the sessions and then see how far we've met the original proposal or not. Which we said, like as usual, it's never like the original proposal.
I mean, it's not as hard as it looks, because we have done a certain amount of retrospectiving on each session in order to plan the next session. So we have got some of that material there, but it feels to me like this session has kind of taken us beyond just talking about how tools affect culture and maybe looking at how they affect collaboration. And this feels like maybe this is a theme we hadn't anticipated. So maybe that's a focus.
I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but obviously identifying what are the deliverables and have we satisfied them. I try to add a second question of what does the community need out of this? So, I mean, we're surfacing a lot of concerns here: project management tools, culture, collaboration. What would be the minimum viable, information that would have an impact on doing something to assist the community? What would that look like?
I mean, the original plan was to come up with a framework which would say what a project management dApp should look like. I think what we've learned is that we need several. It's not going to be one framework, is it?
No,
That
it won't be.
You should
We-
see
we-
Decipher. It started out with a platform that does these things, and then it turned into, no, you need a governance framework, and you need a smart contract. You need project management. You need information dissemination. It just turns into just stacks. I agree.
And then it became a thing of, we didn't want a central authority, just the three of us making all those decisions, because it just didn't seem right. So hence why we have the Decipher MBO.
It's interesting how these parallel journeys do take place in different communities, and there are similarities, but there's differences as well. And the gold is in, I think you, I'm not sure if you or Dave or Curtis said it, is in the learning. Is if we can communicate what we've learned here, then that's a valuable resource in itself. And exactly the same with your experience. If you can communicate what you've done, then that's really valuable to people who are doing similar things.
So yeah, thanks for joining again. Going through this, a lot of content today, and even staying over time.
No, I'd just like to say thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody working so diligently on this and trying to really figure this out as a community. It's where we need to go. It's a great opportunity to talk about it now, because a lot of these things are coming up inside of the community because of SIP 1694. So it's a powerful thing to see where we're going for the future. So Thank you all.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
All right. And all the watchers, see you out there.